The presence and impact that Genghis Khan left behind swept across Asia and into Europe, leaving destruction on a scale that had never been seen before and wouldn't be seen again for centuries. Not to mention the amount of people today that have some relation, making up of 16 million people who have that DNA. During the time, entire cities reduced to rubble, which meant populations were wiped out, proving the scale of what the Mongols did under his leadership was genuinely staggering. To further conceptualize the purpose of this, we must consider how he built that empire. Being one of the most innovative leaders of the medieval world, he created systems of governance that were ahead of his time, while promoting people based on ability rather than birth. This brought something different at a time when every other civilization promoted them based on bloodline. He introduced concepts of tolerance and low taxation that many of the people he conquered had never experienced under other rulers. He also built the first permanent cities in Mongolian history and commissioned a writing system for people who didn't have one. He might have caused terror, but on the bright side, innovation came with it, both of which were the same project, and as we've seen, light and dark can both coexist. Understanding who he was must start with the man before the legend. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was Temujin, a name that meant something like a blacksmith. He was born into the volatile, dangerous world of the Mongol tribes in the 12th century. No, these were not unified people. They were more of a collection of generations with blood feuds between them. They survived on the steppe through nomadic herding and constant low-level conflict with neighboring peoples. There was no permanent settlement, which meant no written language. Everything was solely just tribes. Temujin's childhood prepared him for all of it in the worst possible way. His father was killed by enemies when he was young, after being poisoned by a rival tribe at a feast. The clan that his father had led immediately abandoned the family, because in that world loyalty followed power, and there was no power left. Temujin's mother was left alone with her children in conditions that were close to impossible. In order to beat those odds, they survived on whatever they could find. Small animals weren't going to be enough. In fact, there are accounts that suggest starvation was a real and constant threat. It got worse because Temujin killed his half-brother over a hunting kill. Such an act sounds unbelievable until you understand that surviving on the edge wasn't a minor thing. Later, he was captured and enslaved, but greatness cannot be contained. So Temujin escaped by night in circumstances that later became history. Then he married his wife Borte, and she was kidnapped by a rival tribe too. He gathered allies and fought to get her back. However, his blood brother Jamuka eventually turned against him and led a faction against him in open conflict. Some of Temujin's few loyal men left were boiled alive. Every one of these experiences left a mark in how he led once he had power. The abandonment by his father's clan when status disappeared shaped his rejection of noble birth as a qualification for leadership. The kidnapping of his mother and his wife shaped his decision to ban the practice of wife stealing once he had the authority to enforce it. The betrayal by Jamuka shaped how he thought about loyalty and meritocracy. He was not building an empire from a position of comfort and inherited power. Instead, Genghis Khan was building it from experience of someone who had learned it firsthand. By 1206, the Mongol tribes elected Temujin as their leader. A process called a kurultai, this great assembly of tribal leaders, had granted him the title Genghis Khan. The most common translation of this is universal ruler. What's less debated is the symbolism of what he reportedly did at that moment, because he lifted a single stick and broke it. Then he lifted a bundle of sticks together and could not break them. The message was that when united, they could not be broken. Now the man who had spent his entire youth being broken was now the one holding the bundle. The military system he built from that moment was an innovation in itself, not because the individual tactics were entirely new, but because of how he combined and systematized them at a scale nobody had done before. Mongol horse archers were already extraordinary before Genghis Khan, though. They learned to time their shots at the exact moment all four of their horses' hooves left the ground. This was because it's the only moment during a gallop when the body is stable enough for precision. It was a skill developed through years of practice from childhood, part of a nomadic lifestyle where riding and archery were just like walking. Genghis Khan did inherit one thing, which was an army of men who were among the most capable cavalry in the world at the time. The feigned retreat was one of the Mongol tactics that broke armies across 3 continents. It looked exactly like a retreat, except the Mongol cavalry would turn and ride away. Any enemy force seeing this would naturally pursue, believing they were winning. What they were actually doing was following Mongol horsemen who were leading them deliberately, drawing them out of formation until pursuing soldiers were exposed. Then the Mongols would turn and slaughter them at range, as they stood with no counter for their enemy. The near-total encirclement was psychologically devastating. Mongol forces would surround an enemy on 3 sides, deliberately leaving a visible escape route. The enemy, sensing encirclement, would break toward that gap. And the moment cohesion broke the men, they started running individually rather than fighting collectively. Without having to kill everyone, the battle was already over. The Mongols didn't need to kill everyone. They just outsmarted their opponent. What these tactics shared was an understanding of human psychology as much as military logistics. The Mongols had a good understanding of this. Since the terror itself was a weapon, it was used deliberately and intelligently. The Mongol approach to cities that refused to surrender was direct and well publicized. Either surrender and be spared, or resist and be surrendered. Survivors were sometimes allowed to flee, this time not out of mercy, but because survivors would travel to the next city, traveling with stories that would undermine resistance before the Mongols arrived. Refugees clogged roads, allowing morale to collapse prior to Mongol soldiers arrived on the horizon. A regional governor of the major Islamic Khwarazmian Empire covered much of modern Iran and Central Asia, where he attacked and destroyed a Mongol trading caravan. Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to the Khwarazmian Shah Muhammad II to demand accountability. Genghis Khan's most direct military communication in medieval history. He sent the Shah a message reportedly saying that if the Shah had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like himself upon him, basically implying that he was doing God's work, which confirms his belief in God. Anyway, the Mongols later destroyed the Khwarazmian Empire entirely. They chased Shah Muhammad II across his own territory until he died, forcing him to be a fugitive from the ruins of his own kingdom and hide on an island in the Caspian Sea. The Mongols killed an estimated quarter of Persia's entire population during the campaign, around 2 to 3 million lives lost. The message was received everywhere, not just by the Khwarazmian Empire. What tends to get missed in focusing on the destruction is the fact Genghis Khan was simultaneously doing something that looked nothing like what the terror would suggest. After his betrayal by Jamukha, who had claimed superior right to leadership on the basis of noble blood, Genghis Khan made a decision that was genuinely radical for the 13th century. He would promote people based on ability, not clan affiliation. He elevated soldiers and administrators of common birth to positions of significant power if they demonstrated the skills he needed. Obviously, he needed the best people available and couldn't afford to limit his options with a small military class. The Mongols instituted low taxation across their territories because extracting maximum wealth from a conquered people in the short term is less profitable than maintaining an economic system long term. They instituted religious tolerance, allowing the peoples they conquered to practice their faiths without interference. In an era when religious identity was often the justification for persecution and war, this was genuinely unusual. Genghis Khan himself appears to have been personally curious about different religious traditions, engaging with Buddhist monks, Taoist scholars, and Muslim clerics, which we can guess was genuine interest. As said before, he played part in the creation of Mongolia's first written language, first adapted from a Uyghur Turkic script. Because an empire that size could not be administered by word of mouth, he built the first permanent cities in Mongolian history that became the imperial capital under his successors. He introduced one of the earliest systems of diplomatic passports, physical documents carried by Mongol messengers that threatened death to those who dared to interfere. The Silk Road under Mongol control even became safer for travelers than it had been in generations before, not because the Mongols were gentle, but because the penalties for banditry within the empire were swift and severe. One of the Mongols' most consequential practices was what they did with skilled people in conquered territories. Specifically, they actively sought out engineers, administrators, scholars, physicians, and craftsmen and pressed them into service. Captured Chinese engineers who understood siege warfare helped the Mongols take cities they would have had to bypass. Administrators from conquered Persian cities helped govern newly acquired territories that Mongol warriors weren't trained to run. This transfer of expertise across the entire Eurasian landmass, from China through Central Asia into Persia and eventually toward Europe. This would be part of what historians call the Pax Mongolica, aka Mongol Peace. The Pax Mongolica is a genuinely counterintuitive concept the same empire responsible for some of the worst destruction in medieval history, also created the conditions for one of the most significant periods of intellectual exchange in the pre-modern world. Ideas moved, so technologies moved. The Black Death traveled those same routes west, but so did paper money, gunpowder, the compass, and astronomical knowledge. We wouldn't have it today without the contributions from those routes during the Mongol century. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 was carried out by Genghis Khan's grandson Hulegu, not by Genghis Khan himself, who ended up dying in 1227. The battle is the most painful episode of Mongol destruction for the Islamic world. Baghdad was then the greatest city in the Arab world, and the Abbasid Caliphate was the center of Islamic civilization. Arab chroniclers recorded that the Tigris ran red with blood and black with ink from the city's destroyed libraries. Many centuries of accumulated knowledge, including manuscripts and scholarship, were all gone. The caliph was wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses, where the Mongols believed it was wrong to spill royal blood directly on the ground, so they found another way. Whatever moral framework was operating there, it was one that only the Mongols fully understood. To wrap up what we've covered, Genghis Khan built from the chaotic, violent world of 12th century, and later down the line, Mongolia was the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching eventually from the Pacific coast of China to the borders of Eastern Europe. He did it without starting from power, all without inherited any type of advantage, without the resources that most empire builders had access to. He did it by synthesizing everything available to him, using the tactics of nomadic steppe culture, the administrative knowledge of conquered peoples, accompanied with the leverage of terror, allowed such an impact to be made. He was something more complicated and more human than either of those. Only a man shaped by loss and betrayal could build something unprecedented, and whose methods of building it were the most destructive and the most innovative of his age.